This is Phantom Electric Ghost, and we are live on the air for the first time with Michelle Maidenberg.
Hello.
And wanted to thank you for coming on the show. How are you doing tonight?
Good. Thanks so much for having me. I appreciate it.
So I want to let people know we are a featured podcast on Newsly, so you can use coupon code GHOST and receive 1 month free premium subscription so you can stop scrolling and start listening. This podcast will be on Newsly within an hour. So thank you again for being on the show.
Thank you.
So we've been podcasting since 2016. We started to open up into video podcasting in 2020. And we've initially started with just interviewing musicians because we're a musician.
Uh-huh.
But then in the last year, we've opened up talking to therapists and shamans and business owners. And it's just the way the podcast industry is, it's kind of opened up so you can have
Yeah.
very expansive types of podcasts. And just
Yes.
given part of our music history is that we're into expansive music, which means multiple genres. So we did that
Yeah.
same approach with our podcast. So we decided to go just not be within the music industry, but go into all different areas. So that's just to give people a heads up.
Sounds good. So that's great. And I'm glad that you're including me.
So you are a advocate for mental health awareness. You're a doctor who practices different types of therapy. Is it psychotherapy? Is that the right term?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, you know, it depends on the type of treatment that one does in terms of the type of clients they see and also the type of work they do. So I could talk about what I do personally and the types of clients that I see, but I do a couple different things. I have my hats in a lot of different things. One is I have a nonprofit, which is called Thru My Eyes, and it offers free clinically guided videotaping to chronically medically ill individuals who want to leave a video legacy for their children and loved ones. I teach at NYU in their graduate program, and I teach a class on how to integrate mindfulness into clinical practice, which is a wonderful class, and it's experiential, which I love. And then I also do a lot of writing. I'm a Psychology Today blogger. I also, contribute to a lot of different magazines and newspapers, etc. And then I just published my second book, which I'm so excited about. It's called Ace Your Life. It's right here. I'm a purple girl, as you could tell. But it's called Ace Your Life, Unleash Your Best Self and Live the Life You Want. And it's predicated under acceptance, compassion, and empowerment. And that's what ACE stands for. And this is my second book. The first book actually is called Free Your Child from Overeating, 53 Mind Body Strategies for Lifelong Health. And that's that one. Very different topic. But so I have a lot of interest in both advocacy for both mental health and also health as well. Yeah.
You're a very busy person. You have a
Not
lot of
to,
irons in the fire.
not to mention my 4 children and 4 dogs.
Yeah. Like, well, that's what I find with a lot of people who are creative or very uh,
Uh-huh.
experienced with like professional careers.
Yeah.
You talk to CEOs, they got multiple hats. They're doing all kinds of things. Business directors, creative people, actors, film directors. They're always got something hands in multiple things.
Yeah.
Uh, and so it seems like that's the kind of life that it gives you to actually find yourself you make yourself busy with the things you love to do. And I think so. I
Absolutely.
think you seem to be living your dream, that you're actually doing what you want to do.
I really am. I have to say, like I wake up every morning and I go to work very happily. When I sit and I write, I have a big smile on my face. Talking about like living the life you want to be living and unleashing my best self, I really, really practice, what I preach. I try to, of course,
Mhm.
like every other infallible human being. And I make mistakes and I'm not always mindful, but I try my best. And I do really, I'm very thoughtful about the skills that I teach, and I really try to integrate it into my own life. So it's been very useful for myself too.
But
um,
yeah, well, just the one point before we go into some of the questions you're ready to answer, because I'm going to go through some of those.
sure.
Um, Mental health care has been kind of left
Uh-huh.
at the bottom, like for a lot of people who get their healthcare through work or get
Hmm.
have it's not, they don't give a lot of options. A lot of times it's very expensive. They will maybe give you 10 visits.
Yeah.
A lot of people have to come out of their own pocket. It just
Uh-huh.
seems like it's not thought of as like regular healthcare. And I think maybe you want to talk toward, like, it is a big part of your overall health. And if people seem to not connect the dots.
Well, I think what you're speaking to is the mind-body connection, right? I think
Hmm.
I think what you're saying is that like our health directly affects our mental health, mental health directly affects our health. It like works right conjointly. And that is so true. And actually I mean that's what I teach, right? Because if we're not in a good and also I think it speaks for how we value ourselves. I think that that's really also another important element, so that if you're taking good care of yourself in every way, it means that you see that you have value and it contributes to your confidence and the way you approach the world and your relationships. And I could go on and on and on. Um,
Hmm.
so it, understanding that, our bodies and our minds and like what makes us who we are is all of it. We can't just, and that's why we have to have really good balance too, right? We can't just consider, oh, like I'm going to really consider my mental health and then not, eat right and exercise, right? And take care of your body. It just doesn't work.
It's kind of like
Uh,
holistic thinking. I think it's like the idea of holistic thinking, that like you've got
yeah.
to like consider like all the aspects
Yeah.
of life, and it's not like one or the other. Some people like to say, well, it's all or
It isn't.
nothing. It's all
That's
the
right.
shades of gray, like all pieces of the puzzle. And if
Yeah.
you're not a balanced person, if you're too extreme in anything, you tend to have a bad outcome.
That is true. That is true. You have to have good balance. But it's also considering what makes you feel balanced, right? Because some people are very, very productive at work and then they go home and they have a very, very dysfunctional life at home, right? And the opposite. Some
Mhm.
people have an incredible life at home, but then they go to work and they're not really functioning very well. So, if you're putting effort and time and you're connecting to your values and, mindful decision making and, being in the present moment and having present moment awareness and all those good things, in every aspect of your life, right? That's cultivating a life worth living, right? And having a sense of purpose too, right? So it doesn't have to necessarily be in our work life or in our family. It could be outside of that, as long as we're doing something that we feel that we're being useful and purposeful.
So how does emotional avoidance show up in our thinking and decision making as part of that equation?
Good question. So I did a TED talk on circumventing emotional avoidance. And unfortunately, because, leaning into our negative emotions is very, very uncomfortable, we tend to be very avoidant, which is unfortunate because our negative emotions actually provide us with an incredible amount of information that is critically important to living a valued life. So, for example, if we are angry about somebody's behavior, okay, instead of kind of dismissing that, we can understand what value is that rubbing up against for us. And if you understand that, the reason why that's helpful is it allows you to see what's important to you, and maybe you'll seek relationships, that, for example, feed you in that particular way. So all the emotions that we have, whether it's disappointment or frustration or anger or sadness, every single emotion is worthy of feeling, and it actually is also very essential and helpful for us. So our brains are wired, to avoid discomfort and danger. And unfortunately, sometimes it gets confused at what real danger is.
Mm.
I'll give you an example that happened today in my practice, which was a really good one. And actually, the client that I was working with ended up becoming very tearful, when we had this conversation because she realized how avoidant she is. Actually, it happened with two clients, but I'll mention one. So I'm working with somebody who I've been working with for a number of years, but she happens to be, I've been working with her on her anxiety. And one of the things that comes up for her, and now because of COVID, it made things even worse, is she is very fearful of flying. Okay. When she has to go on a flight somewhere, and a lot of people, by the way, have this phobia. It's not just her, as you know. she becomes intensely fearful and panicky, and it really wreaks havoc. So much so that years ago, before I saw her, she wouldn't fly. So her family wasn't going on vacations. She would avoid taking business trips, and I could go on and on. And it was very, very essential to her work. So it was negatively impacting on her work. So anyway, she decided after, working with her, that she wants to lean into her value of family, and that she realizes by not really working on this fear that she's not living out her value of family, because part of her value of family is actually having fun and doing things with them that have to do with culture and travel and learning and all the other things she loves to do, skiing and whatever. So she is going to be taking a trip to Colorado to go skiing, or her family's going to go skiing. I don't know that she will go skiing, but and we've been working on this, but she hasn't been flying. Part of when you have a phobia, you want to continually exposing yourself to the thing you're most fearful of, right? Because you have to learn to really stretch and grow the part of you that's fearful. And the more avoidant you are, the more fearful you become. Whatever you put effort into grows. Okay. And the more that you expose yourself to the fear, the more you stretch and the more you challenge yourself. So unfortunately, because of COVID, she hasn't been traveling for like 3 years.
Yeah.
So you could imagine
Okay,
her fear.
Yeah. Double fear.
It intensified. It really intensified over the years because the fear becomes even bigger and greater and more intense. And so we were talking about so I've been doing exposure work with her. So she just took a trip to the airport, and did some exposure work with her. And I've been giving her these tasks to do, on a weekly basis. So then she said to me, you know what? I'm going to, I usually check the weather like a week before, and then, like moving up to the time that she has to travel. And I said to her, wow, like, what else do you do to avoid your feelings? And she said, what are you talking about? I said, that's a strategy to avoid your feelings. So she said, what do you mean? I said, well, first of all, the weather could change at any second. Number two, what are you going to do about it? Like, it's raining, it's storming, whatever it's going on outside, you're in the plane. What are you going to do about it? There's nothing you can do about it, right? Like,
yeah, man. Unless there's like a blizzard or something, it's like it would get canceled, but you'll know when it happens.
Exactly. So I said, how is that going to impact on your flying, right? So she said, I need to anticipate exactly what's going to happen so that I could make plans every moment, while I'm on the plane. And I said, no, because that is what you're doing, is it's a compulsory exercise that you're doing in order to manage your anxiety and also to control your environment and your surroundings. I said, that's not real life. We have to be able to build our confidence that no matter what happens, that we'll be able to manage it, right? And we have to believe in ourselves and have a sense of self-efficacy, that we could get through no matter what comes our way. Because essentially in life, we can't plan for everything as much as we try to. And it does give us a sense of control. I said, that's the part that has to grow with you feeling a lack of control, so that you could build up your confidence that you could handle when things are out of your control, because that's real life. And then and then she said to me, the other thing she said was, at the end of our session, in which I was kind of smirking, because she said, and you know what, the next session, as we're building up going on the trip, I want to have a full agenda about what happens when I have a panic reaction. What happens this? What happens this? And I said, you're doing it again. That's an avoidance strategy. So she was like looking at me like with this panicky fear. And she was like, how am I going to do this? And we broke it down. I said, you know what? Like, what would it be like for you to not check the weather? What would that be like? And she just, like, you could see like terror on her face, like literally. And she started crying. She said, I can't even imagine doing that. I'm feeling it right now. It's so anxiety provoking to just think about that. So we use all these different kind of manipulations to try to avoid our negative emotions. And it's not anyone's fault. It's our brain that does that. It protects us. So, something that I said to her is, you know what? When you want to check the weather, say to yourself, brain, thank you for trying to protect me. I don't need protecting right now. I appreciate it. I really appreciate it. Like that that you have my back, right? I'm good. I'm good. You know? So we were, she kind of was laughing, but I was like, you need to talk back to your brain. Your brain is just doing its job. It's no one's fault. You could appreciate that. So did that answer your question?
Yeah, I think a lot of times, in the creative process,
Yeah.
I'm a type of a musician. I like fusion jazz. I like to do a lot of improvisation and what
Uh-huh.
I call extreme of consciousness type of recording.
Yeah.
And I've run into people who are very kind of anal, and they've got to put everything on the page, right? They're a musician that they want everything kind of pre-scored.
Yeah.
And usually what happens is the pre-scored stuff gets thrown out, and it's what we did in the studio
Yeah.
off the cuff ends
Yeah.
up being the magic. And so a lot of people think they've got to overly plan kind
Yeah.
of like the creative process. And I'm kind of a person that believes in the muse and believes in this like universal like key that
Yeah.
musicians kind of find a way to find it. And you
Yeah.
get at peace with yourself over time after you're being a musician that you just accept that
That's
I can
right.
just take all my experiences and I can take playing with this bass player or playing with this drummer and actually come up with something
Mhm.
off the
Yeah.
cuff,
That's
right?
right.
And some people that can actually produce anxiety with some people. Some people is like, well, what are you doing? Like, don't we need to plan it? And I've run into people who have certain types of personalities where they want everything pre-planned,
That's
and
right.
it's hard to get them to get in that mode.
Yeah. You have to trust yourself, right? You have to
Yeah,
you have to trust the creative process. That's
yeah.
hard to
So I think
do.
it's kind of
Right? Yeah.
yeah, it's kind of representative of people who over plan because I'm in business too. I'm in IT,
Yeah.
and programmers we have to plan.
Yeah.
But every day there's something why does your software always get updated? Because we can't anticipate everything, right?
That's
So
right.
we continually update software because we can't anticipate everything that could ever happen. And
Yeah.
so you have to come up with a date that you're going to release it with knowing that you probably don't maybe have it 90% and
Mm.
there's 10% uncertainty and you're never going to close it because there's stuff that happens every day. And we've
Mm.
kind of learned to accept that. But
Yeah.
early in the industry, we tried
Mm.
to make things perfect, and it
Yeah.
was never going to work.
Yeah. I could see that. I could see that. Yeah. And again, I think we could plan and we could plan, but like it doesn't always work out the way we plan it to. It just doesn't. Sometimes you got to just go with the
Roll with the
punches.
punches.
Yeah, roll with
Yeah,
the punches. Yeah, it's just the way it is, right?
yeah. It's kind of like the way you have to think about like your painful experiences.
That's right.
Like as a musician, what we tend to do, which is very cathartic, is
Yeah.
we can take all the pain that ever happened and use it to create some art. Like all the people I know that are artists, from painters to
Wow,
musicians
that's
to
right.
video people and actors, they take those painful moments and they kind of use it's their creative process as cathartic because you
Yeah.
go through what happened, but then you make something, you kind of work through it.
Mm-hmm.
I think I've always had a good balance because I can do that,
Yeah.
and I wonder what people who don't have that outlet, what they do with that. Like, because if you just keep on, you don't learn how to put it out, you don't learn how to process it. How do you function?
It's a good question. It's a good question. And I think people do that in all different kinds of ways. I think it depends on who you are, right? Like some people bake and cook, and some people, create music, and some people form relationships, and some people, I mean, right? Some people play with their pets. Like there's so many different ways to tap into, that side of yourself. I think you just have to kind of recognize what brings you joy and what brings you connection. I know like like I told you I have 4 dogs, but like, one of them is my identified therapy dog, and she like I just sit there with her, she's a little puppy. Like I sit there with her and I just like watch her behavior, and I sit there and I feel so joyful, and
Mhm.
I take in the moment to actually connect to the joy, the free spiritedness. And then she just like goes wacky. Like she'll run across my closet like 17 times,
Yeah,
like exhaust herself. And then
yeah,
she'll she'll jump on my big dog because she thinks she's like, 4 times her size. But like, the freedom to just be like in this little dog, like, and I just marvel at it. And it's like, wow, I wish I didn't have such a complicated brain that I could just do everything she does and be so playful, and just love life the way she does.
You get into the mindset of like an animal. I mean, I've had like parrots and cats,
Yeah.
and being able to just kind of be with them and not be watching my Twitter or
Yes.
reading my, actually just focus on my pet
Yeah.
for like an hour or two and not try to think about anything else.
Yeah.
And it's kind of like walking in the woods. I'm a mountain biker. I like to go in the woods,
Uh-huh.
and I'm part Cherokee, Blackfoot Indian. And it's kind of like my ancestors had this thing where you can kind of commune with Gaia, right? And you turn off the phone. You don't have a Walkman. You don't do anything. You just go out in nature and you kind of feel it.
Yeah.
And I've
Yeah.
been able to do that since I was like 12 years old. It was just something I got into. But I
That's
think
great.
it's really important for people to find a way to do that, however you want to do it. But yeah, I think it helps you.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's being, like I said, in the present moment. It's really, really, really being attuned and being in the present moment with whatever it is, right? And you could do that. I teach mindfulness exercises, and you could do that by just looking up in the sky and looking at the trees, right? You could do that by just like noticing your breath. You could do that by touching something, like, and using your senses. There's so many ways to just being in the present moment that's
Mhm.
so powerful, because you're really kind of getting back into your body. Um, so yeah, there's like I said, I teach a whole semester on mindfulness practices. So there's a lot of things you could do to be in the present moment all the time.
And so if we kind of go on to another topic, is the healthy
Oh,
way to engage with like painful feelings. We're talking about like I like to just go off and do nature walks,
yeah,
or I'll go on my piano and I'll write a song,
yeah,
or I'll go and write a poem,
yeah,
or I'll
yeah,
play with my cat, or something. Like it might be any combination of any of those, but
huh?
just finding a way to deal with it and process it.
Yeah,
Um, and I guess like the unhealthy ways would be, to do addictive things or things that are going to hurt yourself.
yeah,
But so maybe we can talk about like the
sure.
healthy ways.
Healthy ways are better, right? You don't want to do those unproductive and unhealthy. Yes. Part of it is acceptance of what is, right? Because we try to push it away and avoid, like I said. So if we're going through like a difficult experience, or if we have a negative emotion that surfaces, whatever, kind of is showing up, is accepting it for what it is without wishing it were different. Because we get into a little bit of a tussle. We don't like the way we think, we don't like the way we feel, and again, it becomes like thoughts about the thoughts and feelings about the feelings and thoughts about the feelings and feelings about the thoughts, and we just spiral, and becomes this sandwich of emotions, that we struggle with. So if we're able to just be in it and be accepting of it and observing it and acknowledging it, right? Like, this is what's showing up for me, and sometimes there's, secondary emotions, like anger is a good one. We might present as being very frustrated and angry in the moment, but when we really sit with it and we let it kind of simmer, we recognize that it's coming from a different place, that underneath that could be sadness, right? But it morphs into, again, a feeling like anger, because anger makes us feel strong. It makes us feel powerful. It makes us feel like, again, more hopeful. But it is a false sense of strength. And, aggression doesn't really lead us anywhere. But if we really get to the core of what we're sad about, or what we need more of, or what we want to connect to, then we'll more readily, again, right, like, take actions based on how we want to be, or our values. So besides acknowledging, right, accepting, acknowledging, and labeling, right, and saying and putting it out there, you really want to do it very incrementally, because when I say, let's lean into this and see what it feels like. So that person that I just told you about flying, and I said to her, what would it feel like to not, right, to not look at the weather? And she had this very visceral response. I said to her, well, if you do have that response, and I took the moment in the session with her to say to her, what's, kind of close your eyes and really feel what's going on in your body right now. Where do you feel it? And she said, I feel it right in my stomach. And I said, that's where you feel it. I said, that's interesting, because where I feel it, typically is in my chest. I feel like a really gnawing feeling right in my chest that's pretty deep and intense, right? So to recognize what's going on in your thinking, how you're thinking about things, how you're feeling, and what's going on in your body, your bodily sensations, connecting to all of that. And then the most important piece of this is really self-compassion. And we don't really learn how to do that. We don't really learn how to be self-compassionate. Whether it's saying like, in this moment when I experience this thing, right? This is really difficult for me. And what I need in this moment of suffering and what I need in this moment of distress is whatever, and to just take the time. And I have to tell you, talk about being cathartic. That is so healing. I know when I feel very, very distressed and I just take a moment and I sit there and I close my eyes and I'll do a butterfly, which is, like bilateral stimulation, which is very relaxing. And I'll say like a mantra to myself, like, I'm okay, or this too shall end, or I will be okay, or I've been challenged before and I've been able to get through it, whatever it is,
Yeah.
and then to say to myself, this is so hard. It's so hard for my friend to be upset at me. It makes me feel so insecure, makes me feel like I'm never going to be friends with this person ever again, and that nobody likes me or whatever is going on, and these feelings are really hard to take in. Feelings are so hard to sit with. But what I recognize, if I connect back to my values, and that's the last part of this, is how friendship means so much to me. That's why I'm so distressed, right? Because friendship means so much to me and my friend is upset at me. And that just doesn't sit well with me because I really value our friendship and I really want to make sure that we're connected, that is really integral to me in my life. And then you could decide, right? How do I want to handle this? Maybe I just want to sit in the feelings and process them a little bit more and understand myself better and like think about how I want to handle this situation. And you'll do it in a lot more mindful way than just being reactive. Because then it comes from your thoughts and your feelings, not from your values. And we never, ever want to react from our thoughts and feelings. I can't say that enough. And here's an example. Like if you take a piece of paper after you're very, very reactive and have an intense emotion and you write your feelings down, right? And you're really angry at somebody and you're cursing them out and whatever you're doing. If you go back to it a couple days later, inevitably, you say to yourself, whoa, like, look at these feelings that I had. Oh my goodness. Like, I can't even believe that it was so intense. And then also you realize sometimes how irrational they are, right? They're so like overreactive and they're not necessarily commensurate to the situation or what happened. And you only know that because returning back to it and recognizing that it could have gone in a very different direction. So you really need the time to process when things kind of happen. And when you have those intense feelings, it's really helpful.
I think as a songwriter, we kind of take that stuff and we do create diaries, we create songs, and we go back and we look at them. And like a lot of us have like archives of the stuff we do, and we take a lot of emotional moments. Most of the great songs are because something really happened. And there's a universal way to express it. And it usually is something bad or something negative that somebody was able to turn to something pretty or beautiful or poignant that is universal. And a lot of times as a songwriter, you do go back. Like you go write something and you go back and you look at what you did 2 months ago and you pick it back up, like looking at it from not being in the moment. And then kind of being able to like adjust it. Well, I can take this emotion and I can actually turn it into something.
That's right.
Right. So it becomes like your kind of gold. And the one problem sometimes with songwriters is we kind of like, well, you don't have to create crucibles to create art. Right. So sometimes we get in the problems like, oh, we have to create these crisis moments to create the art.
Yes.
And so you got to get out of that pattern. So you don't want to always be creating a crisis just so you can create some art.
Hopefully not. That wouldn't be good. Totally. Yeah. Well, if you think about it in terms of the, kind of creative arts and the thing to know about that, which is an interesting point, is our difficult memories and difficult situations and experiences. That's what actually stays in our minds, and that's what holds our memories. So when I do workshops, sometimes I'll ask people, think about like something that happened to you that was so exciting and so joyful, like one of the most exciting, wonderful things that ever happened to you, right? And then they'll be like, okay. And I'll say, tap into your emotions relative to that situation. Like, I want you right now to feel the feelings you felt, when your kid was born or whatever. And they'll say to me, okay, right. And then I'll say, okay, now think about the most difficult, heart wrenching thing that has ever happened to you. And they'll say, okay. And I'll say, now tap into the feelings, like really get viscerally into the emotions that you felt. And guess what? We can a lot more readily tap into our negative emotions and our negative memories than we can with our positive ones. And
Yeah.
that's why there's such beautiful art and music and so many things that come out of these very deep, dark, distressing emotions, because we don't get the same thing out of our joy. We just don't. And that's why how people say, like, when you're in a moment of joy or an experience of joy, like, literally capture every moment because it's so fleeting. And it is. It's fleeting also in our memories, and that's how we're wired cognitively and neurobiologically. So that's really important to know.
That makes a lot of sense because, like,
Yeah.
what I do is I kind of found to make
Uh-huh.
myself more like upbeat music, I get into a kind of funk or
Yeah.
disco, and it will make you happy because it makes me think of something like a party. Like, and so you're not thinking as more like the crisis kind of scenario. And
Yeah.
it's harder to write those songs. Like, it's harder to write the happy song or the dance song or the kind of
That's right.
feeling good song. Because
Yeah.
sometimes you look at it and like, well, that seems kind of corny and that seems kind of fake. It doesn't seem as authentic, right? So then you get into trap like that. The deeper emotion, the darker emotion feels more authentic. It feels more like that. That's
Yeah.
like, yeah. It's just as an artist, you look at it and you're like, well, maybe I shouldn't judge that like that.
But it's so true. It's so true what you're saying. It is. And, if, like you said, the songs that are written, from that kind of deep, dark place, like Taylor Swift, for example, like she's known to
We're
write
going
these
there.
songs about breakups and about, her lost loves and her deep emotions. And they're amazing. Like, right. And a lot of artists, like, songwriters, they say that they wrote from like a place of distress and sadness.
Yeah, it's just like you're kind of like a method actor. You have to find a way to get out of it.
That's
Like,
right.
you think like a guy like David Bowie, he actually used to get into Ziggy.
That's
And he
right.
supposedly stayed in the Ziggy character through
Oh,
the
wow.
whole tour, right?
Wow.
He actually treated it like a method actor, and he had people asked him and said, "Why do you do that?" I said, "Well, because that's how he had to process it." So
That's
when
right.
he became Aladdin Sane, he became Ziggy, he
Yes,
became the Three-Way Duke. He would actually go into it like a method actor, and sometimes that can be very destructive if you don't know how to get out of it.
that's right. That's right. Yeah, you could kind of get lost in it, if you think about it.
Yeah, he admitted that he actually got lost in it and it was negative. But, yeah,
Yeah.
but he's like, I think you just like, you look at the process as like, well, a method actor, it's so great the work they create, but
Yeah.
sometimes they hurt their body, they hurt their
Yeah.
mind, they hurt their soul. I mean, they actually damage themselves,
Yeah, you
you know.
can, for sure.
But it's just a matter like, do you do that for your art or you do that for your work? Do you go so crazy into your work that
Yeah.
you're becoming like the method actor, that you're doing so much that you're bringing yourself to your bare limit.
Well,
Just
hopefully
just
not.
to
Hopefully
hit
not.
it. But a lot of people, that's how they operate. It's kinda like, they cram
Yeah.
or they do it all night or they stay up all night trying to
Yeah.
hit that goal, and that's not like that's so extreme to
It
do
is
these extreme things rather than trying to be more balanced, maybe.
100%. Absolutely. Yeah.
So one of the things about like anxious and depressed thoughts and
Uh-huh.
feelings that people, how is the best way to process that, if you're not somebody who's gone to a therapist and you feel like that,
Yeah.
there's like a hesitancy, in some, like in my community, the African American community, especially, there's a deep hesitancy to go to
Yeah. Yeah.
any doctor.
Yeah.
And so if you're feeling that way and you're like a macho type of person, or you're like
Yeah.
somebody that's like even a matriarch that's in charge of everything, you don't want to look weak. You don't want to look like you're needy. So how do
Well,
you kind of get
so
beyond that?
there lies the problem, what you just said, that you feel weak and needy, right? That's a mindset. Like if you ask for help or if you can't manage your emotions or cope, right, then you're needy. And like I said, we're never taught how to do that. You know, I mean, I'm going to bring up a frustration, but like I know in schools, right, across the country for that matter, it's not just here in New York where I live, but um, there isn't like social emotional learning that goes on in most schools. You know, fundamental skills that teach kids how to cope with their emotions. Now, the last time I checked, like think people are going out of control, like literally, right? When you see a lot of these
Mhm.
murders, I mean, I mean, what's going on in terms of these horrible, horrible atrocities, right? With gun shooting and just everything. Um,
Well, boundaries. You got students who are attacking teachers. It's becoming
yeah,
more common where young kids
that's right.
don't have a boundary and just
Yeah,
somehow are not taught boundaries, and they just feel it's okay to
that's,
lash out at their teacher, where my day, we would have never thought that you could do that, you
well,
know, and
but again, we're
seeing
not
boundaries are open.
right because we're not taught to regulate our emotions. Like, what do you do when you have those big emotions or intense emotions? Like, right? And how do you handle them? We're not taught how to do that. And that, to me, that's more fundamental than learning like math and science, quite honestly. Not
Mhm.
to
Well, it's
say that
just
math and
like,
science,
how you gonna be
not
a person in society?
exactly. Like, are we raising people that could actually function in society? Like, that's the big question. And we're not. We really aren't. It's sad to me. It really is sad. You know,
It's
I
just
even
scary, yeah, 'cause I was an Uber, and I stopped being an Uber because during this pandemic, they started getting this kind of behavior where people would just lash out at you for no reason, where it didn't happen like that before. But
yeah.
suddenly I started getting people that just would just go off the handle, and it
Mhm.
was like, I don't know why, other than the pandemic caused all this stress, but I'm like, "Well, I'm not gonna be the punching bag."
But the point is that there is a lot of stress. You know, there's a lot of stress across right the country right now. Well, a lot of people have financial stress. A lot of people I mean, there's all different kinds of stressors that are going on. The pandemic obviously did not help, you know, matters and actually made it a lot worse. But people are suffering. You know, there's a lot of people that experience trauma. I mean, I'll never forget there was this, you know, I mentioned this before in another podcast, but we know that many, you know, people who are in jails, criminals, have extensive trauma histories. It's a known fact. Extensive trauma histories. We're talking about, you know, abuse, neglect, you know, etc. You know, we're not into preventative care in this country because it's too expensive. We're just not. You know, we deal with things as they come along, and it's more like tertiary, you know, care than it is preventative care, which is really sad to me, at least. You know, so again, like I could sit here and go on about like the fundamental changes that need to happen in our society in order to really, you know, born and raise people who are functional in society. But you know, I'm going to talk about emotions because that's my thing. But we're really not helping people and teaching them how to manage their emotions. And there's been a lot of good work done, you know, in all different kinds of communities, you know, with mindfulness, you know, with meditative practices, um, you know, teaching again, you know, more contemplative practices, and that's been really, really helpful. And I've done, you know, workshops with people in all different kinds of communities, whether it's African American communities, Hispanic communities, you know, again, indigenous, you know, so it cuts across, and there's some really good work out there that's being done, which I'm happy to see. I really am. Um, but there's so much work to be had. I have to say, there's so
Yeah.
much. So when somebody's experienced, because the question you asked is when somebody's experiencing anxiety, depression, like, you know, how do you cope with these emotions? You know, it's a lot of what I said. It's really learning to kind of be with the emotion and understand the utility of it. So if I'm on and connecting that to your values, I'm trying to think of an example maybe that happened today because you know I always have examples every day when I have my practice of, people leaning in and out of their values. Let me just think of one. So, um, yeah, so I've been working with somebody, actually on his anxiety, and it just so happens this happened during the pandemic, which is just awful. But his son, um, one time experimented with pills as a senior in high school, and he died of fentanyl poisoning.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. We hear about this happening and we think, oh, it's like somewhere else and someone else.
Yeah, it's pretty
Dude,
big. It's a
This
big
is
problem.
this is a huge, huge like epidemic that's going on now. People are dying left and right, especially kids.
Yeah,
Okay.
it's super
Because
powerful.
yeah,
It doesn't take a lot.
one pill. He was with a bunch of friends. He was the only one. I mean, actually, I'll tell you the story because it's mind blowing. He was with a bunch of friends. Couple of them got sick, really, really sick. An ambulance came. They went to the hospital. He just happened not to get sick. He went home. Okay, these kids, got their stomach pumps, whatever happened. Do you know none of the parents contacted each other. Nobody in the hospital contacted the other kids' parents to let them know that these kids had fentanyl in their systems. So this kid went home, went to sleep, and never woke up. Could you
Oh, that's
imagine?
just, I think it's all about the shame of it, right? So
I mean,
people have got like the shame of it and the embarrassment of it. So, people don't make the right decision because they're more concerned about the optics. Like,
well,
what,
but we're talking about hospital staff. We're talking about, I
oh,
mean,
yeah. Well, I'm
nobody.
talking about the parents talking to each other, but
Oh yeah, I
it's,
mean that for sure. But even the hospital staff, nobody contacted these parents. This kid could have. I mean, if you think about it, right? If his parents would have known, he would. I mean, they would have done
yeah.
something about that.
You would think with the epidemic, they would have had a process that
I mean,
if they know this was like a bunch of kids, that they would have some kind of procedure to
yeah,
make sure that didn't happen. But,
yeah.
you learn and you learn.
It's so. I mean, it's beyond awful. But anyway, so listen, when no parent would ever expect their child to die before them. Like it is one of the most severe and complicated, traumas and grief ever imaginable,
I had a
and
cousin that had the same fate. He
yeah,
was on a bus, fentanyl, didn't wake up,
oh
and
wow,
people didn't even know what was going on. They thought he was just slumped over and he OD'd on a bus.
oh God,
So,
oh,
but this is like it's a crazy epidemic. I know a lot of musicians have fallen to it. I'm in the music world, and it's
yeah,
just it kind of goes toward what do you do with those negative feelings and how do you process them? Do you do something that's dangerous to
yeah.
kind
Well,
of
so,
push it
so
down?
what I was going to bring up is, so you have this person who I'm seeing in therapy, right? And he's not going to get his son back. Like it's a horrible, horrible situation. It's grief like no one could ever imagine. He has to be with his emotions, whether he likes it or not, right?
Hmm.
So, like, I'm talking about to an extreme of a person being with negative emotions and feeling anxious and depressed, like, like you just said, and the more that he avoids it, okay, and I'm not saying to slump in it and to, right, sometimes there is healthy avoidance, sometimes, but only mindful healthy avoidance. If the feelings viscerally are so overpowering that you really can't even kind of be with them in the moment, then it is okay mindfully, right, to take some time to like disconnect. But even more so, just like I described before, what I've taught him to do is when he gets overwhelmed with these emotions, right, is to feel through them. And like I said,
Hmm.
to close his eyes, right, and to say, like, where is this impacting me? Where do I feel it in my body? When I think of my son and I think of this, tragedy, what does it bring up for me? Right. And he goes through anger and sadness and frustration. You can imagine, right? Like,
Hmm.
he even goes through joy because he thinks about like joyful moments they've spent together. Like it's like constantly like, flowing for him. Um, and we talk about that, and he has a moment where he cries, right? Or he feels hopeless and helpless, right? There's all different kinds of feelings. And then he's able to be self-compassionate, and he's able to say to himself, this tragedy really, really hurt me. And I miss my son, and I miss him so much, and I think about him. And when I think about him, it makes me feel so sad, and and kind of connecting to his sense of sense of purpose, which is like educating people on fentanyl poisoning.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
so it doesn't happen to anybody else, right? Or keeping his son's memory alive, right? Because his son was an artist too. So like he has all these amazing works of art that his son created when he was alive. So just all those things helps him connect his sense of purpose, which is really important for him. I'm just gonna grab a drink because I'm about to it's onto my desk, which is kind of funny, right? Excuse me. So does that answer your question?
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense because when I think about my cousin who passed away that way, I think about the happy moments when I knew him, as he was a younger cousin, and I never imagined he would leave the world like that. But I try to just think, I'm a Buddhist, so we have kind of different ways of handling things through meditation and breathing and chanting. And we kind of think about people's paths and we believe that they go to another place and it's not the end, right? That there's a whole, so we can be happy about where they could be, right? So some people, if they don't have that, they have some kind of spiritual capability. If it makes it hard with things like if you think that there's nothing and then something happens, you don't have a lot of places to go, right? But if you have some kind of spiritual capability to go into or lean into or so that you can see the positivity and everything, even negative things, you can find what's good about it and keep on going forward, then that can help you.
Well, and also there's always a lesson to be learned in everything that we experience, and that's really important too. Like you always want to walk away thinking, what did I learn about myself, about others, about life, about the way I want to be living. So there's always lessons, but you have to look for them sometimes. They're not so, readily available unless you really kind of look, kind of seek them out.
So self-acceptance and self-compassion we've been talking about, is that kind of like the idea, like loving yourself first at a high level? I've heard a lot of people talk about making sure that you love yourself before you can actually love anybody else.
Well, I feel like it goes hand in hand, like I said, I could even show you kind of the diagram that I made up, but that's in my book, but it's kind of this evolving process, I'm going to say. So I'll just show you what it looks like, but like the ACE model, right? But I have, and I'm, you want to see it, but what it says basically is, if you have acceptance, right, then you practice self-efficacy, you practice self-worth, and you practice self-belief and self-love, right? And that connects to, they all connect. Acceptance, compassion, and empowerment all connect, right? With, again, practicing all of these, ways to cultivate yourself. And in between all of that is curiosity and flexibility, which inevitably helps us to be our best self. So again, it's acculturating all of these. And on the outside of the diagram, it says value reevaluation and value-driven behavior. Okay. So our values, connecting to our values is what helps to really fortify all of this so that you're ending up really kind of leaning into kind of your best self. But that takes very mindful thinking, and it takes a lot of work and effort. And I always ask my clients, and today, actually, I had a client who, again, some avoidance behavior. And I said, how willing are you to work on this? And she said to me, I'll try. I'm not asking you to try. I'm asking you to do. Right?
So that's that flexibility. The flexibility.
Yeah.
It seems like it seems like inflexibility or being stuck in a narrow vision in a lane. Like if you're not willing to like
Right.
evolve or
Oh,
to adapt
oh,
or to adjust, and you only see things like A,
that's
B,
right.
there's no gray,
That's
right?
right.
If there's no gray, then I think you're going to have a hard time because you're always going to be looking for absolutes.
Yes,
And in the way the world is, there's nothing really absolute.
that's true. That's very true. Yeah. So, again, you have to really kind of be understanding of all of that. So when we were just talking about self-acceptance and self-compassion, you're not going to be self-compassionate and have self-acceptance unless you're practicing, right? It takes practice. So what I do in my book, which, helps to kind of tease it out, but the first chapter is on our thinking, how our brain works and our biology. The second chapter is on values and understanding what our values are. And again, there's an exercise on how to actually stipulate what your values are. And then I break it up into acceptance, compassion, empowerment. And the first parts of those chapters talk about the barriers. What gets in the way of our acceptance? What gets in the way of our compassion? What gets in the way of our empowerment? And then the second part of the chapter, talks about how to integrate it into our lives. And there's like exercises that help. At the end of each chapter is a guided meditation that I recorded, because I have a YouTube channel also that I post weekly. I publish weekly guided meditation on all different kinds of topics. So you get that also at the end of the chapters. But that helps. Again, it all goes hand in hand, right? You have to be practicing all of this at once. Yeah. Um, it's but there are some people who have, I think, a more challenging time in certain areas, more than others. Some people have a harder time being self-accepting. Some people have a harder time being self-compassionate. Some people have a hard time, kind of in the doing and the action taking, and empowering themselves. So it's also important to stipulate for yourself where you see, the challenge and the, the difficulty, so that you're able to kind of hone in and focus on that specific area too.
I guess the question I have is like sometimes people inherit very toxic values and then they're stuck in their childhood values that might have been very kind of like a very
Mhm.
like a domestic violence kind of scenario where they repeat the values they were taught that were like violent, right? They didn't get taught very good values. They've got like a bad example. So can they evolve those values to where they need to be?
So those are not values. Yeah, you're calling
Mm.
them values. Because people say to me, like, you know, uh, what about people who are gang members, right? Like, uh-oh. Do you hear that wind? My goodness.
Yeah.
Should I shut the window? It's like literally like coming through my window. I'm sorry.
Okay.
Um, so wow, it sounds like there's like a sandstorm out there. I don't know what that is, but okay. So we have to be careful what we're calling values, just so you know. Um, so somebody says if somebody like wants to hurt people and murder them, right? Like, does that mean that that's a value? No, murder's not a value. So if somebody is behaving in ways, because you made the point of like based on their childhood that they're learning certain behaviors, right? They're learning certain behaviors. But if you really go underneath that, then you could kind of understand what the value is. Okay. So, like, for example, some parents beat their children. Okay. Now, there are some sadistic parents who just enjoy hurting children, right? Which there's nothing I can say about that. That's just horrible and, whatever. But there are some parents who will tell you, I do it because my child has to be disciplined, and that's the only way they'll listen. Or, we believe in strong discipline and we believe in respecting your elders or respecting parents. So if a child is disrespectful, it's okay to spank them or whatever. Okay. Now, you may say to me, well, spanking your child is a value. No, that's not a value. If you go underneath that and you try to understand the core of why a person behaves that way, then you could get to the value. Okay. So if I speak to a parent like that, who's beating their child, and I'll say to them, when do you tend to be your child? Well, when they're disrespectful, like they should be listening to their parents. They have to learn respect for authority, right? Because culturally, in a lot of cultures, there is that belief system, right? Um, so then I'll say to them, well, I get that, right? Because you want your child to be respectful and, to authority and hold a job and be functional and all of that. Why is that important to you? What value represents why that's important? What is important to you? And what will they say? Respect.
Respect is the value.
Yes. Yes.
But the
Respect.
belief might be something that has nothing to do with the value. The belief might
Well,
cause them to do something that
right.
actually doesn't match their
So
value.
they may say it's okay to beat my child because then, right, because I am leaning into my value of respect. I'm teaching them how to respect. And then I would say, well, it seems like respect is really important to you. And I think that's amazing. Like respect is a really important value. But is there another way, right? Is there another way that could be more productive that could get your child to be respectful? And also, when you're hitting your child, right, inevitably you're being disrespectful towards them,
Mm-hmm.
right? So you're not really practicing respect, are you? Like you're teaching them respect, you're trying to teach them respect, but you're disrespecting them. So it's not really teaching them respect, right? So maybe there's another way, right, that you could really hone into your value and act in a way that's going to actually accomplish what you want it to accomplish. You hear that? It's a
That's very
different way.
interesting. Yeah, yeah. I think a lot of people confuse that because
They do.
they think that the family value is that discipline, and that discipline is actually okay because that's like culturally your value as a culture to say that's what it
Yeah,
is. And maybe
yeah.
it's a belief system and it's not really a value, but
It's a
they
belief.
it's
Yeah, it
collided.
is.
It gets collided and they don't pull it out.
Yeah, well, even like, people say to me, what about gang members? Like certain gangs, they believe in violence, whatever else. And I say, you know what? If I have a conversation with a gang, and again, I'm generalizing, of course, but if I have a conversation with a gang member and I say to them, what's important to you? One thing that I could say about people who are in gangs, they are part of a very tight community, okay? And they have each other's back.
Mhm. They
They have
believe
each
in that.
other's back. Yes. Okay. Nobody messes with them.
It's like a
Okay.
family to them,
And,
right?
but that's the value. The value is community. The value is like collaboration, is team. That's what the value is. It's not
Mhm.
violence. It's not violence. That's just a behavior they do,
Yeah,
right? In order
ma
to connect. But that's not what the value is. So
yeah,
that's
family and,
yeah,
and the
that's
connection.
exactly. Yeah.
Well, I think we kinda hit our hour mark, and it's always very interesting how conversations evolve. I
Yeah.
learned a lot about the difference between values and
Oh,
and
good.
and actions because I hadn't really thought about that, in that term, and I think that is very helpful to a lot of people who
Oh,
might
good.
be confused about that. I think that that was probably a really good point
Well,
among
but
a
here's
lot of the good points that you
thank you. But here's the thing. If you learn, okay, and that's what I teach. If you learn what your core values are and you learn what actions you need to take in order to lean into your values, that's how you cultivate a life of, a life that you want. And that's what I teach. I mean, I practice that. And I really, really am so, so connected and mindful of what my values are. And I really try to act on behalf of them. And it's always formative in my mind all the time. So that's part of like the growing and changing and enhancing and being who you want to be. So
that's
I'm
good.
glad that was helpful.
Yeah.
I'm
I
really
believe sorry, but I believe what you're saying is a very good life strategy that maybe it's very thoughtful and
uh-huh,
it makes you think. Like a lot of people maybe don't think as much as they should. They
yeah,
don't really get behind the words and question what does it really mean, right?
right,
They just take what somebody tells them and then they kind of repeat it without really does
right,
how does that fit in my life? And I like the fact that you have the critical thinking to uncover like things that have to do with you as an individual and how
yeah.
you can actually progress. I think that's a very important conversation that people
Thank
need to have.
Yeah. Thank you. It was so nice talking to you.
Thank you. I think it's always very
Mm.
meaningful for people to learn different ways, strategies, how to build your life,
Yeah.
to the best, most, the fullest way you can,
Yeah.
and talking to as many people as you can is
Mm.
what I try to do to get different points of view, which is always enlightening. So
Yeah.
thank you again for being on the show.
And thank you for having me. I really appreciate it.
Okay, everybody remember to go to www.michellemaidenberg.com. We always encourage people to click on the web URLs that we present, and you can find all these strategies or get in touch with what she is doing, and you can get into her world by checking out that link. And we do encourage you to do that.
Thank you. I also have all of I'm a blogger for Psychology Today, and I have hundreds of articles on all different topics too on my blog. So you could definitely check that out on my website as well.
Okay, you
Okay.
can get to the blog from there.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, cool. Thank you
Okay.
very much.
All right.
Thank you very much.
Thanks
Have a
so
good
much.
night.
You too.